My name is Ryan Mitchell, I'm 32, and I never thought I'd be telling a story about how my own brother betrayed me. The day I discovered $175,000 missing from my savings account, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Marcus and I had always been competitive, but this was different. Growing up, he was the golden child, charismatic, popular, the son who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the planner. Maybe that's why I never saw it coming. Before I tell you how my own brother stole my future and mocked my existence, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had someone you trusted stab you in the back. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, Marcus and I shared a typical brotherly relationship. He was 2 years older, and I idolized him in that way younger brothers often do. We built forts in the backyard, played video games until our parents forced us outside, and defended each other from neighborhood bullies. Those early memories are golden, untarnished by what would later unfold. Our divergent paths began around middle school. Marcus blossomed socially, developing the kind of natural charisma that draws people in effortlessly. His circle of friends expanded while mine remained small but tight-knit. I preferred coding on my computer to parties, finding satisfaction in creating simple programs that actually did something useful. Marcus has never met a stranger, our mother would say proudly at family gatherings, while Dad would clap him on the shoulder with obvious pride. Meanwhile, I'd show them a simple game I'd coded, and they'd nod politely before turning back to whatever story Marcus was animatedly telling. This pattern continued through high school. Marcus became captain of the football team, dated the head cheerleader, and was voted most likely to succeed. I joined the computer club, developed a chess algorithm that beat our school champion, and spent weekends building my first rudimentary apps. Different paths, but both valid, or so I thought. Summers were particularly revealing. Dad owned a small sporting goods store, and both of us worked there from ages 15 through college. I'd arrive early, meticulously organize inventory, handle the books, and help customers find exactly what they needed. Marcus would show up late, spend his shift charming customers with stories and jokes, and often duck out early for important social obligations. Yet somehow, Dad always praised Marcus's people skills, while taking my consistent work ethic for granted. "Ryan, why can't you connect with customers like your brother?" Dad would ask. "Business is about relationships, not just inventory counts." What he didn't see was how often I covered for Marcus, fixed his mistakes on orders, or picked up his slack. I didn't complain because that's not who I was. I figured hard work would eventually speak for itself. By senior year of high school, our trajectories were firmly established. I had been saving diligently for college, squirreling away every paycheck while Marcus spent his earnings on weekend trips and gifts for whatever girlfriend he had that month. When college acceptance letters arrived, I'd secured scholarships based on academic merit but still needed my savings to cover the remainder from my computer science program. Marcus, despite his mediocre grades, received a partial athletic scholarship to a state school. Our parents dipped into their retirement fund to cover his remaining tuition, something they never offered to do for me. "Marcus needs a little extra help focusing on academics instead of working," Mom explained when I questioned the disparity. "You've always been so self-sufficient, Ryan." Self-sufficient or simply overlooked? The question lingered, but I pushed it aside. Family gatherings became showcases for Marcus's social prowess. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas celebrations, 4th of July barbecues all revolved around his stories, his achievements, his charm. Relatives would ask about his latest adventure before turning to me with the obligatory, "And what about you, Ryan? Still doing that computer thing?" I'd explain my latest programming project, only to watch eyes glaze over before someone inevitably redirected the conversation back to Marcus. My accomplishments existed in a realm too abstract for my family to appreciate, while Marcus's achievements were tangible, immediately understandable. Despite this, I maintained my course. While Marcus partied through college, I studied relentlessly, joined coding competitions, and secured summer internships at tech companies. I was building something meaningful, step by careful step. My resentment simmered beneath the surface, but family loyalty always prevailed. He was my brother, after all. Blood meant something. By graduation, the pattern was set. I saved, planned, and worked methodically toward long-term goals. Marcus took shortcuts, relied on charm, and somehow landed on his feet despite minimal effort. I told myself that slow and steady wins the race, that my time would come. What I didn't realize then was how deeply these family dynamics had shaped us both. Me into someone pathologically responsible, perhaps too cautious, and Marcus into someone who believed rules existed for others, not for him. These childhood lessons would eventually collide with devastating consequences either of us could have predicted. As we entered adulthood, I carried with me both the quiet determination that defined my character and the unspoken wound of always being second best in my family's eyes. Little did I know how this foundation would both break and remake me in the years to come. After college, our paths diverged even further. I graduated with honors in computer science and immediately landed a job at a respectable tech company in Boston. The position wasn't glamorous, but it offered stability, decent benefits, and most importantly, room to grow. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment, drove a reliable but unremarkable Honda, and lived well within my means. My priorities were clear: build an emergency fund, contribute to my 401k, and save for a down payment on a home. I tracked every expense in a detailed spreadsheet, invested consistently, and watched my net worth grow month by month. Financial independence was my goal, and I pursued it with the same methodical focus I'd applied to my studies. Meanwhile, Marcus dropped out of college in his senior year, just 3 credits short of graduation. "College is for people who need a piece of paper to prove their worth," he explained at the family dinner, announcing his decision. "I'm ready for the real world." The real world, for Marcus, meant bouncing between sales jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a year. He'd start with enthusiasm, charm his way to impressive commissions, and then inevitably clash with management over rules he found restrictive. Each departure was always someone else's fault: a boss who was threatened by his success, colleagues who couldn't keep up, companies that lacked vision. Despite his employment instability, Marcus maintained an enviable lifestyle. He leased luxury cars he couldn't afford, rented apartments in trendy neighborhoods, and somehow always had money for designer clothes and nights out at exclusive clubs. I couldn't understand how the math worked, but Marcus had always been allergic to financial discussions beyond boasting about his latest splurge. "Life's too short to pinch pennies, little brother," he'd say whenever I questioned his spending. "You're missing out on the best years of your life staring at spreadsheets." Our divergent approaches to life crystallized when I purchased my first home at 27, a modest 2-bedroom condo in a decent neighborhood with good investment potential. I'd saved diligently for 5 years to afford the down payment, researched the market extensively, and negotiated a favorable mortgage rate. When I invited my family to see my new place, Marcus arrived driving a brand new BMW M5. "Just closed a massive deal," he explained vaguely when Dad admired the car. During the small housewarming gathering, Marcus pulled me aside. "Nice starter home," he said, emphasis on starter. "A bit boring, but practical. Very you." What should have been a proud moment felt diminished. My parents spent more time discussing Marcus's car than my new home. I reminded myself that financial security isn't flashy, but it's substantial. Still, the familiar sting of being overshadowed remained. 3 months later, Marcus met Jessica Harrington at a charity gala he'd attended with a client. Jessica came from old money. Her father, Richard Harrington, owned a chain of successful car dealerships across New England. She was beautiful, polished, and accustomed to the finer things in life. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Their wedding was extravagant, a weekend affair at a historic estate with over 300 guests, covered by a local lifestyle magazine. I served as best man, delivering a speech that carefully navigated the truth of Marcus's character while celebrating the moments of genuine brotherhood we'd shared. My gift to them, a carefully chosen bond that would mature in time for their future child's education, went unacknowledged amid the mountain of lavish presents. Shortly after the wedding, Marcus announced he was starting his own business consulting firm with backing from investors. Those investors, it became clear, were primarily his father-in-law. Harrington Capital Consulting launched with impressive offices in downtown Boston, a staff of 10, and clients suspiciously similar to Richard Harrington's business associates. Within 2 years, Marcus and Jessica had their first child, Madison, followed 14 months later by Maxwell. They purchased a 5-bedroom colonial in an exclusive suburb, complete with swimming pool and home theater. Their life, as portrayed on Marcus's increasingly active social media accounts, was picture perfect: beautiful family, thriving business, luxury vacations, and charity galas. My life progressed more quietly. I earned promotions at work, continued investing wisely, and dated occasionally, but never found someone who felt right for the long term. After a particularly painful breakup with Caroline, a pediatric nurse I'd dated for nearly a year, I threw myself into work and a side project, a healthcare communication app one believed could streamline patient-provider interactions. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult to endure. Marcus would hold court, detailing his latest business triumph or showing videos of his children's achievements. My parents beamed with pride, especially my father, who had always dreamed of entrepreneurial success but never achieved it himself. "When are you going to settle down, Ryan?" my mother would inevitably ask. "You're not getting any younger. Leave him alone," Marcus would interject with false generosity. "Not everyone's cut out for the family life. Some people are meant to be the bachelor uncle." These comments stung, but I channeled my energy into building my financial security and developing my app idea. By 30, despite my modest salary, my investment portfolio had grown impressively through consistent contributions and compound growth. I lived comfortably but frugally, prioritizing future security over present luxury. What no one in my family knew was that my net worth likely exceeded Marcus's, despite his outward displays of wealth. Through careful research and selective investing in tech stocks and index funds, I'd built a substantial nest egg. I took quiet satisfaction in this knowledge while watching Marcus leverage himself further with each status purchase. Our interactions took on a new dimension when Marcus began asking for small loans to cover temporary cash flow issues in his business. The first request came after a family dinner. "I've got a major deal closing next month, but I'm short on operating capital," he explained. "Just need $20,000 to bridge the gap. I'll pay you back with interest in 30 days. Against my better judgment, I transferred the money. 45 days later, after several reminders, Marcus repaid the principal but forgot about the promised interest. This pattern repeated several times over the next 2 years. The loan amounts increasing, the repayment times extending, and the excuses multiplying. I justified these loans as helping family, but a small voice wondered if I was simply buying Marcus's attention and approval. Still, I never refused him until I needed to fund my own dream. My healthcare communication app began as a simple solution to a problem I'd observed while dating Caroline. As a nurse, she constantly struggled with fragmented communication systems that delayed patient care and created unnecessary stress for medical professionals. Although our relationship ended, the seed of an idea had taken root. Nights and weekends became dedicated to development. I built a prototype that allowed secure, HIPAA-compliant messaging between healthcare providers, with smart routing, priority flagging, and integration capabilities with major electronic medical record systems. Early feedback from Caroline and her colleagues was enthusiastic. "This could save lives, Ryan," she told me during one of our now friendly catch-up coffees. "The current systems are dinosaurs. If you can get this to market, every hospital would want it." After 18 months of development, I faced a critical decision. The app needed significant investment to complete development, secure necessary certifications, and launch properly. I could continue the slow path, working on it part-time while maintaining my job, or I could commit fully and accelerate the timeline. After careful consideration, I took the leap. I submitted my resignation, calculated I had enough savings to support myself for 12 months of intensive development, and created a business plan to seek additional funding. The first few months were exhilarating. Free from the constraints of employment, I refined the app, conducted user testing with volunteer medical professionals, and prepared pitch materials for potential investors. My savings dwindled according to plan, but I remained on schedule. Then came the rejections. Investor after investor expressed interest in the concept but hesitated on the execution. Healthcare is heavily regulated, they'd explain. The sales cycle is lengthy and complex. The big players will crush you or copy you. Each meeting ended with some version of, "It's promising, but too risky for our portfolio at this stage." 6 months in, with my savings depleting faster than anticipated and no funding secured, panic began to set in. I reduced expenses further, moved to a cheaper apartment, and considered part-time consulting to extend my runway. That's when Marcus unexpectedly reached out. "Let's grab dinner, little brother. Been too long since we caught up." Over steaks at an upscale restaurant, which he insisted on paying for, Marcus was uncharacteristically interested in my work. I explained the app, the market opportunity, and my funding challenges. "You know, this actually sounds viable," he said, surprising me with his enthusiasm. "Healthcare tech is hot right now. You're just approaching the wrong investors." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen by my brother. He asked insightful questions, offered suggestions on my pitch deck, and promised to connect me with serious players in his network. "Send me your business plan and financial projections," he said as we parted. "I know people who specialize in healthcare ventures." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I spoke regularly. He reviewed my materials, suggested improvements to my valuation model, and seemed genuinely invested in my success. During one late-night strategy session at my apartment, we reviewed my financial situation in detail. "You need to show investors you have more runway," Marcus advised as we examined my accounts on my laptop. "They're worried you'll run out of cash before gaining traction." I walked him through my personal financial portfolio, including my emergency fund, investment accounts, and the remaining startup capital in my business account. In retrospect, sharing my banking details was foolish, but Marcus was family, and his newfound support felt like the brotherhood I'd always craved. "I might be able to help with bridge funding," Marcus offered casually. "Let me talk to some people." 2 weeks later, Marcus introduced me to Lawrence Whitman and Peter Donovan, described as angel investors with healthcare backgrounds. The meeting at Marcus's office went surprisingly well. They asked tough but fair questions, seemed impressed with my technical solutions, and hinted at serious interest. "We typically invest in pairs," Lawrence explained. "If you can secure half your needed capital elsewhere, we'd consider matching it." Hope surged. I had approximately $175,000 in liquid assets that I could commit, which would mean a potential total investment of $350,000, enough to reach key milestones that could attract larger funding rounds. "Send us your banking details showing available capital," Peter requested. "Once verified, we can move forward with term sheets." That night, I forwarded my account statements to the email Lawrence provided, copying Marcus to keep him in the loop. For the first time since launching this venture, success seemed within reach. I allowed myself to imagine presenting my completed app at healthcare conferences, securing hospital contracts, and finally achieving something my family would recognize as valuable. "This could be huge, Ryan," Marcus said during our celebratory dinner. "I always knew you had it in you." His approval, so long sought and rarely received, felt intoxicating. In that moment, I believed our relationship had finally evolved beyond childhood rivalries. My cautious nature had temporarily been overwhelmed by something more powerful, the validation of the brother whose approval I'd always craved. 3 days later, Lawrence and Peter stopped responding to my emails. Calls went unanswered. When I mentioned this to Marcus, he seemed unconcerned. "Investors move slowly, then all at once," he assured me. Give them time. I tried to focus on development while waiting, but an uneasy feeling grew. Something didn't feel right. 1 week stretched into 2, then 3. My anxious calls to Marcus were met with increasingly vague reassurances. Then came the morning that changed everything. I still remember exactly how it felt, that sick, hollow sensation when I logged into my bank account and saw the balance. At first, I thought it was a system error. My primary savings account, which had held $175,000 just days before, now showed $1,243.82. My investment account, previously valued at over $200,000, was nearly empty except for a few stock positions that couldn't be liquidated quickly. My hands shook as I called the bank. The representative's voice turned sympathetic as she confirmed multiple transfers had been executed over the past 2 weeks. No, there were no signs of external hacking. Yes, the proper authentication had been used. No, they couldn't reverse the transfers as they'd been properly authorized. Can you tell me where the money went? I asked, my voice barely steady. She provided the receiving account details, accounts I didn't recognize. I hung up and immediately drove to the local branch, where the manager showed me security footage from the ATM. There, clearly visible, was Marcus using my debit card to withdraw the maximum daily limit, repeatedly, over several days. The investment account was worse. Someone had logged in with my credentials and systematically sold positions before transferring the funds out. The broker's cybersecurity team confirmed the access came from an IP address matching Marcus's home or office network. Disbelief gave way to rage as I drove to Marcus's house, calling him repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. When I arrived at his expansive colonial, I pounded on the door until Jessica answered, looking annoyed. Marcus is in his study, she said. He's on an important call. Perhaps you could come back later? I pushed past her, ignoring her protests as I stormed through their immaculate home to Marcus's wood-paneled study. He was lounging in his leather chair, feet up on the desk, not on any call at all. His expression shifted from surprise to calm resignation when he saw me. You need to calm down, he said evenly, gesturing to a chair I had no intention of taking. Where is my money? I demanded, my voice shaking. I know you took it. The bank has you on camera. Marcus sighed, as if I were overreacting to some minor inconvenience. I was going to tell you. It's a temporary situation. Temporary? You stole $175,000 from me. Borrowed, he corrected. An opportunity came up that couldn't wait. The returns will be significant. As he explained with infuriating casualness, he'd used my funds to invest in a guaranteed real estate flip that required immediate capital. The investors I'd met were friends of his, playing along with his scheme. He'd intended to return the money with substantial interest after the property sold. The deal hit a snag, he admitted. The property needs more work than anticipated. It might take a few months longer to recoup the investment. When I demanded immediate repayment, Marcus's demeanor changed. The charming mask slipped, revealing something colder beneath. What do you need it for? He asked, voice laced with contempt. No wife, no kids, no life. Just that little app nobody wants to fund. He leaned forward. I did you a favor. Now your money's actually doing something instead of sitting in accounts while you play entrepreneur. I was stunned into silence, not just by the theft but by the casual cruelty of his dismissal. When I found my voice again, I threatened legal action. Marcus laughed. Go ahead. I'll tell everyone how you gave me the money to invest for you because you trust my business acumen. It'll be your word against mine. Who do you think Mom and Dad will believe? The successful businessman or the perpetual disappointment? The worst part was, he was right. Without written agreements, proving theft versus a verbal arrangement would be nearly impossible. Even if I could, the damage to my parents would be devastating. As if reading my thoughts, Marcus added, Besides, I'm good for it. Eventually. I have a family to support, expenses, commitments. You. You'll be fine eating ramen in your studio apartment for a few more months. I left his house in a daze, but the real shock came that evening when my parents called. Marcus had already spoken to them, spinning a story about how he'd been helping me invest my money and I'd misunderstood the arrangement. He's under a lot of stress with this app thing, my mother said. Marcus says you burst into his home, frightening Jessica and the children. He took everything. I tried to explain. My savings, my future. He says he'll pay you back once the investment matures. My father responded. You need to be patient. Your brother knows what he's doing. He has a family to support. My mother added, the implication clear. My needs were secondary because I had chosen not to follow the traditional path of marriage and children. Over the next few days, the magnitude of my situation became clear. Without capital, I couldn't complete development or certification for my app. Without my app, I had no chance of securing investment. Without investment, I had no business. And without my savings, I had no safety net. I consulted an attorney, who confirmed my fears. While I had a case, it would be difficult to prove criminal intent rather than a misunderstanding between brothers. Civil action was possible but would be lengthy, expensive, and might yield nothing if Marcus had already spent or hidden the funds. Family financial disputes are messy, the lawyer advised. Courts often prefer to view them as civil disagreements rather than criminal matters. My potential investors disappeared completely once I admitted I no longer had matching funds. My landlord was unsympathetic to my situation when I couldn't make rent. Within weeks, I was forced to vacate my apartment for a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood, sell my car for a much older model, and take whatever contract programming work I could find to keep afloat. Meanwhile, Marcus's Instagram showed his family vacationing in the Maldives, Jessica sporting a new diamond tennis bracelet for their anniversary, and construction beginning on a pool house addition. My money, my future was funding his picture-perfect life, while mine collapsed around me. Depression set in. I withdrew from friends, stopped attending family functions, and fell into a routine of working, sleeping, and little else. The app that had been my passion gathered digital dust on my hard drive, a painful reminder of what could have been. The final blow came at Thanksgiving, which I attended only at my mother's insistent pleading. Marcus held court as usual, never acknowledging what he'd done. When dessert was served, he raised his glass in a toast. I'm thankful for family, he said, eyes briefly meeting mine with what looked like amusement. And for opportunities seized. I left early, ignoring my mother's protests. On the drive home, I realized I had reached my breaking point. Something had to change. I couldn't get my money back through conventional means, but perhaps there were other ways to balance the scales. Little did I know that rock bottom would become the foundation for something I never anticipated. The holidays passed in a blur of minimal existence. I took every programming contract available, working 16-hour days to rebuild some financial cushion. My studio apartment was barely furnished: a mattress on the floor, a folding table for my computer, and a single chair. Luxury now meant having enough energy at the end of the day to cook a proper meal instead of eating cereal straight from the box. I avoided family completely, ignoring calls from my parents and blocking Marcus on all platforms. My mother's tearful voicemails about healing the family rift went unanswered. I couldn't bear to hear another defense of Marcus's indefensible actions. January brought a new low when my old Honda finally died beyond repair. With no savings for even a modest replacement, I was reduced to public transportation in a Boston winter, adding hours to my commute to client sites. Each day became a mechanical exercise in survival: work, eat, sleep, repeat. The turning point came unexpectedly. While waiting at a coffee shop between client meetings, I overheard a conversation at the next table. Harrington Capital's returns seem too good to be true, a man in a business suit was saying. My cousin invested with them last quarter and is already seeing 20% returns. Marcus Harrington has the golden touch, his companion replied. Everything he touches turns to profit. Hearing my brother's name sent a jolt through me. I hadn't realized he'd renamed his consulting firm to incorporate his wife's family name so prominently. 20% returns in this economy? That raised immediate red flags. Curiosity piqued, I began researching Harrington Capital that evening. The company website was slick and impressive, featuring testimonials from satisfied clients and highlighting Marcus's innovative investment strategies. What struck me as odd was the vagueness surrounding these strategies, lots of buzzwords but little substance. A deeper dive into business registration records showed multiple LLCs connected to the main company, with funds flowing between them in complex patterns. Having managed my own investments for years, I recognized the hallmarks of potential financial manipulation. 2 weeks of intensive investigation later, I had assembled enough concerning information to warrant further action. But I needed more insider information that public records couldn't provide. An opportunity presented itself when a job board listing caught my eye, a contract development position at a firm that handled some of Harrington Capital's IT needs. I applied immediately, downplaying my qualifications to avoid appearing overqualified. The interview was straightforward, and I was hired to help update their client portal system. From this vantage point, I gained limited but valuable access to data flows within Marcus's company. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. The business operated much like a sophisticated pyramid scheme. New client investments were used to pay returns to earlier investors, creating the illusion of consistent profits. Meanwhile, substantial sums were being siphoned into Marcus's personal accounts and offshore holdings. The clincher came when I encountered Diane Reynolds, a former accountant for Harrington Capital who'd been abruptly terminated 3 months earlier. We met at the IT firm's holiday party, where she'd accompanied a current employee. After a few drinks, she confided her concerns about the company's practices. "I questioned some transactions," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Large transfers without proper documentation. The next day, I was escorted out by security, accused of accessing unauthorized files. They threatened legal action if I spoke about it." I gave her my number, suggesting we continue the conversation in a more private setting. Over coffee the following weekend, Diane provided details that completed the puzzle. Marcus wasn't just running a questionable business, he was engaging in securities fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement on a significant scale. "He's not just taking from investors," she explained. "He's stealing from his father-in-law, too. Richard Harrington thinks his money is going into legitimate business expansion, but most of it's being diverted." Armed with this information, I faced an ethical dilemma that kept me awake for nights on end. Exposing Marcus would mean destroying not just him, but potentially harming my parents, his children, and possibly even myself through association. The scandal would become family legacy. Was justice worth such collateral damage? What tipped the scales was discovering that many of Marcus's clients were ordinary people, teachers, nurses, small business owners who'd invested their retirement savings based on his promises. People who, unlike his wealthy father-in-law, couldn't afford to lose their investments. My brother wasn't just betraying family, he was potentially ruining lives. I decided then that holding Marcus accountable wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. Someone needed to stop him before more people were hurt. That someone would be me. My approach needed to be strategic and methodical, traits I'd honed throughout my life but Marcus had always dismissed as boring. I created a secure digital workspace, using encryption and anonymous browsing to protect my activities. I established a systematic approach to gathering, organizing, and verifying evidence of Marcus's fraudulent practices. Working with the precision that defined my programming, I documented fund transfers, created timelines of suspicious activities, and compiled statements from former employees willing to speak under condition of anonymity. I consulted with a securities attorney. Not as a potential client, but under the guise of considering a fintech startup in a regulated space. "Hypothetically," I asked, "what evidence would regulatory authorities need to investigate a potential investment fraud?" The attorney outlined the types of documentation that would trigger serious investigation: evidence of misrepresentation to investors, proof of commingling personal and client funds, documentation of falsified returns, and patterns suggesting a Ponzi scheme. I took mental notes, never revealing my true purpose. As my evidence accumulated, I wrestled with doubts. Was I pursuing justice or vengeance? Was this about protecting innocent investors, or punishing Marcus for taking my money and mocking my life choices? The answer was uncomfortable. It was both. But the legitimacy of my grievance didn't invalidate the importance of stopping his fraudulent activities. 3 months of meticulous preparation later, I had assembled a comprehensive digital package documenting years of financial crimes. The evidence was irrefutable, detailed, and actionable. Forwarding it to authorities would irreversibly set consequences in motion. The night before I planned to act, I sat in my sparse apartment, finger hovering over the send button. An email from my mother arrived, photos of Marcus's children at their private school recital. My niece and nephew innocent in all this. Would I be the villain in their story? Then I remembered my own shattered dreams, the app that could have helped countless healthcare workers, the future stolen not just from me but from every investor trusting my brother with their savings. I thought of Diane, whose career had been damaged for doing the right thing. Of my parents, whose blind spot for Marcus had enabled his worst behaviors. Sometimes healing requires lancing the wound. With that thought, I finalized my plans for the next day, knowing the path forward would permanently alter my family forever. The execution of my plan began on a Tuesday morning in April. I had selected the date carefully, the day after Marcus was scheduled to present at a major investment conference, where he would inevitably make grandiose claims about Harrington Capital's performance and prospects. His public statements would directly contradict the evidence I was about to release, adding another layer of provable deception. I had prepared 3 separate digital packages of evidence, each tailored to specific recipients. The first and most comprehensive went to the Securities and Exchange Commission's tip line, with detailed documentation of securities violations, fraudulent reporting, and investor deception. The second went to the Internal Revenue Service's Fraud Division, focusing on tax evasion through offshore accounts and unreported income. The third package went to the Massachusetts State Attorney General's office, highlighting violations of state securities regulations. Each submission was anonymous but complete, providing investigators with a roadmap to Marcus's crimes. I included account numbers, transaction histories, corporate structures, and statements from former employees, with their identities protected. I had built the case so thoroughly that authorities could not ignore it without being negligent themselves. With the official submissions complete, I moved to the next phase. I contacted Eliza Jordan, an investigative financial journalist known for her hard-hitting exposés on white-collar crime. Our conversation was brief and carefully constructed. I have documentation of a significant investment fraud operation in Boston, I explained, using a voice modifier and keeping personal details vague. Multiple victims, tens of millions in misappropriated funds, and connections to prominent local businesses. Her interest piqued. I provided enough details to convince her of the story's legitimacy without revealing my connection to Marcus. The final digital package was delivered to her secure Dropbox, a version of my evidence tailored for journalistic rather than legal purposes. With these actions, I had lit 4 separate fuses. At least one would reach its target. Then came the most difficult part: waiting. I continued my contract work, maintained my sparse lifestyle, and monitored developments from a distance. For 2 weeks, nothing seemed to happen. Had my evidence been ignored? Had Marcus somehow intercepted the submissions? Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, I received an urgent text from my mother. "Family emergency. Come to our house immediately." When I arrived, the family dynamics had shifted dramatically. My father sat ashen-faced in his recliner, staring at the muted television where a financial news channel showed footage of Harrington Capital's offices with "under investigation" emblazoned across the screen. My mother paced the living room, alternating between anger and distress. Marcus sat on the couch, his usual polished appearance disheveled. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. "The SEC froze all the company assets this morning," my father explained hollowly. They're saying Marcus was running some kind of Ponzi scheme. It's a misunderstanding, Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. My lawyers will sort it out. What happened? I asked, feigning ignorance. Someone sent detailed evidence to multiple authorities, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing as he studied my reaction. Years of financial records, internal documents, statements from disgruntled ex-employees. Someone who had access and held a grudge. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I knew he suspected me. I maintained a neutral expression, neither confirming nor denying his suspicion. Did you do this? He asked directly, his voice low but intense. The room fell silent. My parents looked between us, confusion evident in their expressions. Did you steal my life savings and mock me for having no wife, no kids, no life? I countered calmly. Marcus's face flushed. That was different. It was a temporary. I didn't steal from you, Marcus, I interrupted. I didn't have to. You did this to yourself, one fraudulent transaction at a time. The implications hung in the air. My mother gasped, finally connecting the dots. Ryan, what have you done? She whispered. I didn't do anything illegal, I replied truthfully. If Marcus had been running a legitimate business, there would be nothing to investigate. My father stood shakily. You reported your own brother to the authorities? Someone had to stop him, I said, feeling a strange calm. It wasn't just my money he took. He's been stealing from everyone who trusted him, his investors, his father-in-law, probably even you. Marcus lunged toward me, but my father stepped between us. Is it true? He demanded of Marcus. Have you been running a fraudulent operation? For the first time in his life, Marcus had no smooth answer, no charm to deploy. His silence was confirmation enough. The family confrontation was interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing. It was Jessica, hysterical. The news had broken publicly. Eliza Jordan's article had just been published online, detailing the alleged fraud at Harrington Capital. Investors were panicking, calling for answers. Richard Harrington had learned of his son-in-law's deception and was threatening legal action of his own. Marcus left abruptly, but the family fracture had only begun. Over the next few weeks, the situation unraveled with breathtaking speed. The SEC investigation uncovered even more extensive fraud than I had documented. Client funds had been misappropriated, returns fabricated, and financial statements falsified for years. Major clients publicly distanced themselves from Harrington Capital. Business partners severed ties. The company's assets remained frozen as investigators traced the complex web of transactions Marcus had created. Richard Harrington, humiliated by his son-in-law's deception and the damage to the family name, withdrew all support. The luxury cars were repossessed. Credit cards were declined. The facade of success Marcus had maintained began crumbling visibly. The personal consequences were equally severe. Jessica filed for separation when she discovered their family finances were built on fraud and that Marcus had been maintaining a secret apartment for entertaining young women who weren't his wife. She took the children and moved back to her parents' estate, filing for divorce within weeks. Media coverage was relentless. Rising star entrepreneurs fall from grace dominated local business news. Marcus, once celebrated in Boston business circles, became a cautionary tale. Former friends and associates claimed they had always been suspicious of his too-good-to-be-true returns. Through all this, I maintained my distance, watching the consequences unfold without direct involvement. I felt no joy in Marcus's downfall, only a somber recognition that justice, while necessary, brings its own form of pain. The most difficult moment came when federal agents arrested Marcus at our parents' home, where he had been staying after Jessica removed him from their house. The charges were extensive: securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. My parents watched helplessly as their golden son was handcuffed and led to a waiting car, photographers capturing the moment for the evening news. Through legal proceedings, a portion of my stolen funds was recovered and returned. It wasn't the full amount, but it was enough to restart my life and resurrect my app development plans. The recovery came with mixed emotions: validation of the wrong done to me, but also the weight of knowing my actions had contributed to my brother's downfall. My parents' reaction evolved over time. Initial shock and anger gave way to painful recognition of their role in enabling Marcus's behavior. Years of preferential treatment and blind faith had reinforced his belief that rules didn't apply to him. Our relationship remained strained but began a slow, tentative healing as they came to understand the full scope of what Marcus had done, not just to me, but to countless others. "We should have seen it," my father admitted during a difficult conversation months later. "We should have questioned where all that money was coming from. We should have listened when you tried to tell us about your own situation." It wasn't the vindication I had once craved, but it was something more valuable: honest recognition of a family dynamic that had harmed us all in different ways. As for Marcus, he eventually accepted a plea deal rather than face trial. The evidence against him was too substantial to fight. Our final conversation before his sentencing remains etched in my memory, not for any dramatic confrontation, but for the surprising moment of clarity it contained. "You could have ruined me years ago," he said, studying me across the visitor's table. "You had the skills to uncover what I was doing long before this." "I trusted you," I replied simply. "Until I couldn't anymore." He nodded slowly. "I always thought you were the weak one. Turns out you were just playing a longer game." It wasn't an apology, but from Marcus, this acknowledgement was perhaps the closest he could come to recognizing the brother he had consistently underestimated. 1 year after Marcus began serving his 6-year sentence at a minimum security federal prison, I stood at the window of my new office, watching Boston's financial district bustle below. The contrast between my current circumstances and the desperate days following Marcus's theft was striking. With the partial recovery of my funds and a small business loan, I had restarted development of my healthcare communication app, now named MedLink. Working with a small but talented team, we had completed the core functionality and secured HIPAA compliance certification. Beta testing in 3 Boston hospitals had yielded enthusiastic feedback and valuable improvement suggestions. "The interface is intuitive," wrote one emergency department charge nurse. "This could save precious minutes during critical situations." These practical validations meant more to me than any family approval ever had. I was building something genuinely useful, something that could improve healthcare delivery and potentially save lives. The purpose that had once been clouded by family drama and financial desperation was now crystal clear. Investor interest had materialized as well. Ironically, the publicity surrounding Marcus's case had created awareness of my story. When a local tech blog interviewed me about rebuilding after financial fraud, I mentioned MedLink. This led to a meeting with legitimate healthcare venture capitalists who recognized the app's potential. "We're impressed by your resilience," said Catherine Simmons, the lead investor who eventually provided series of funding. "Most people would have given up after what you experienced." My personal healing had progressed in parallel with my professional revival. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the complex emotions surrounding family betrayal and its aftermath. I had come to recognize that my lifelong need for Marcus's approval had made me vulnerable to his manipulation. Breaking that pattern meant accepting that some relationships cannot be saved, only understood. My parents and I had established a new, more honest dynamic. Without Marcus's overwhelming presence, they began to see me more clearly, not as the disappointing second son, but as someone whose quiet strength had weathered extraordinary circumstances. My father started asking genuine questions about my work, while my mother no longer pressed me about marriage and children. "We're proud of how you've handled all this," my father said during a Sunday dinner that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "You've shown real character." Their approval, once so desperately sought, now felt pleasant but unnecessary. I had found validation in my own resilience and in building something meaningful. Perhaps the most unexpected development was meeting Sarah Chin at a healthcare technology conference where I was presenting a MedLink demo. As a software engineer specializing in medical applications, she asked the most insightful questions about our security protocols and scalability plans. Our professional conversation evolved into coffee, then dinner, then a relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. "I like that you're building something that matters," she told me early in our relationship, "and that you don't need to show off about it." With Sarah, I experienced a partnership of equals, something I realized had been missing from my previous relationships. She understood my work, challenged my thinking, and appreciated my methodical nature rather than finding it boring. For the first time, I didn't feel I needed to be someone else to be valued. 6 months into Marcus's sentence, I received a letter from him. The handwriting was familiar, but the tone was not. Less confident, more reflective. He wrote about the financial therapy program he was required to attend, where he was examining the psychological roots of his fraudulent behavior. "I'm beginning to understand how much of my life was built on appearances rather than substance," he wrote. "The constant need to seem successful drove me to take shortcuts I knew were wrong." It wasn't a direct apology, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts. I responded with a brief but honest letter, neither condemning nor absolving him, but opening a door to possible future communication. Our parents visited him monthly, reporting that he seemed to be using his time productively, teaching business classes to fellow inmates and participating in a restorative justice program. I remained cautiously optimistic but realistic about the possibility of genuine change. On a cold January morning, I finally visited Marcus myself. The prison meeting room was spare but not intimidating. Marcus looked different. Thinner, less polished, but somehow more present than I'd ever seen him. Our conversation was awkward at first, then gradually more authentic as we navigated this new territory. "I've been thinking about what happens when I get out," he said. "The finance industry is obviously closed to me forever." "What are you considering?" I asked. "I've been working with some guys here on basic financial literacy, budgeting, avoiding predatory loans, that kind of thing. There might be something there, helping people avoid the mistakes that can ruin lives." The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but I recognized the potential value in someone with Marcus's knowledge of financial manipulation teaching others how to protect themselves. "You've always been good at explaining things," I acknowledged. "If you're serious about it, there could be a legitimate path there. Would you be willing to help me figure it out when the time comes?" he asked, vulnerability showing through his usually confident demeanor. "I'd consider it," I replied honestly, "if I see evidence that this change is real." As I left the prison that day, I reflected on how thoroughly our positions had reversed. Marcus, once the golden child with every advantage, now needed my help to rebuild a legitimate life. I, the overlooked brother, was now successful on my own terms. Yet this reversal brought no satisfaction, only a somber recognition of how easily human lives can derail and the difficult work required to set them right again. The following spring, Medlink secured its first major hospital system contract. As our team celebrated, I found myself thinking about the strange path that had led here. Without Marcus's theft, would I have pushed myself to this level of achievement? Without hitting rock bottom, would I have found the determination to rise so decisively? The answer wasn't simple, but I had come to believe that our greatest growth often emerges from our deepest wounds. My relationship with Sarah continued to deepen. When she moved in with me, we chose a new place together, not a status symbol like Marcus's colonial, but a comfortable condo with a spare bedroom converted to a shared home office. Our life was built on substance rather than appearance, on shared goals rather than social expectations. As Medlink expanded to additional hospital systems, I occasionally spoke at healthcare technology conferences about our journey from concept to implementation. During one such talk, I shared a principle that had become central to my approach. True success isn't measured by comparison to others or by external validation. It's built on integrity, resilience, and creating value that outlasts setbacks. This philosophy, hard-won through painful experience, had transformed my definition of achievement. The brother who once mocked me for having no wife, no kids, no life, had inadvertently pushed me toward a more authentic version of success than his hollow imitation had ever been. The story doesn't have a perfect ending. Family wounds heal slowly, and trust once broken is never quite the same. Marcus continues his sentence, with an uncertain future awaiting him upon release. My parents still struggle with their role in enabling his behavior and the complex emotions of having a son in prison. My own journey includes ongoing vigilance against falling back into old patterns of seeking external validation. But imperfect endings are usually the most honest ones. Life rarely provides neat resolutions, only opportunities to choose better paths forward. In that spirit, I'm building a life defined not by comparison to my brother or approval from my parents, but by the value I create and the integrity with which I create it. So what's your take on this story? Have you ever had someone close to you betray your trust, and how did you handle it? Did you seek revenge, justice, or find another path forward? Drop a comment below, hit subscribe if this resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes hitting rock bottom is just the beginning of building something unshakable. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by others' perception of your life.